Well, our guest tonight is someone who's seen war up close and isn't afraid to say when it's gone wrong. Colonel Douglas Macgregor is a decorated combat veteran, a West Point graduate, and a former senior advisor to the Secretary of Defense under President Trump. He's not just a soldier, he's a strategist, a scholar, and a truth teller. He led troops in the biggest U.S. tank battle since World War II, taught at West Point, and has written 5 books that have shaped how militaries around the world, including in Israel, Russia, and China, think about modern warfare. But here at home, he's made enemies in all the right places: the Pentagon brass, the defense contractors, and the DC elite. Why? Because he's called out the forever wars, the failed occupations, and the lies that have sent Americans to die in countries most politicians couldn't find on a map. Colonel Macgregor believes in a strong military used wisely, not endlessly. And above all, he believes in putting America first. Colonel Macgregor, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Happy to be here.
Okay, I've got to know, what do you think Trump is thinking? I know this is like a big question to ask because who knows what's going on in his mind. But what in the world is he thinking? Threatening to blow up Moscow, bombing Iran. I mean, here's a guy that claimed he was anti-war. He was here to stop the killing. And yet the latest reports are that from the Financial Times is that he actually asked Zelensky if he could hit Moscow and if he could hit St. Petersburg. What in the world is he thinking?
I think it's important to understand that Donald Trump is a marketing genius. He's someone who knows how to sell things. And that's what's put him where he is, frankly, in life. Now, what he sells is almost inconsequential for him. In other words, you hand him something and say, go sell this, he'll go out and sell it. Now you're talking about international relations, international finance, military power. These are things about which he knows nothing. And he's not alone, Kim. I mean, most people in Washington don't know much more than he does. I mean, this may be frightening to most Americans, but they need to understand they don't know what the hell they're doing. They never have. We have no national strategy. We pick countries and transform them into what we insist are enemies so that we can justify this enormous defense budget, and it can bomb and attack at will when we decide to do so, if it suits us. So if you're looking for a rationale, a coherent strategic rationale for anything, it doesn't exist. You know, quick anecdote.
Yeah.
Years ago, a good friend of mine who worked, interestingly enough, in Washington for decades, he's passed on now. He worked under Eisenhower in the Eisenhower administration in the White House. He came back and ended up with Bush and some other people. And he said, look, Doug, presidents need at least 4 areas of competence. One, national security. In other words, the military. You need to understand the Defense Department and the military, how it works, so forth. You need to have some grounding in foreign policy. You need to understand the international actors and interests. Then you have to have some understanding of the financial system, not just here at home, but globally and how it works. Then finally, you need to know enough about politics to get yourself elected. He said, so what do all the presidents come to office with? They figured out how to get themselves elected. The rest of it isn't very important because Americans don't understand it. They don't really question it. And he said, so you've had one president, and he told me this back in the 90s. Today, I guess we can go on and say 70 years, one president, maybe Nixon is the only other exception, who had all those categories checked in some way. And he said, in fact, Eisenhower was the one who had never been in politics and didn't know how to get elected. He said it didn't matter. He was a national hero. They put him up. Everybody said, I like Ike, and went out and voted for him. But he understood the rest: international relations, defense, and finance.
Mm-hmm.
So here you have a president that he's figured out how to get elected, for better or worse, but he doesn't know anything about the rest of it at all. But he'll tell you that he knows everything about everything all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think he doesn't understand when we talk about blowing up a deal, we actually mean bombs this time. In his business life, blowing up a deal doesn't actually involve nukes or any other sort of missiles. But in this case, it kind of does. And so when he talks about, he's almost treating it like, oh, yeah, I'll just blow up the deal, and I'll threaten to blow up the deal. and maybe that'll bring them to the table. And it's like, you're actually threatening to blow up Moscow. This is not just blowing up a deal. You're maybe going to lead us into an actual world war. This won't be just like, oh, they feel threatened, they're going to come to the table. I mean, how do you think Putin would react to that? These threats of, we're going to attack Moscow or we're going to attack St. Petersburg until you come to the table. Do you think he's going to actually be persuaded by that?
President Putin, like President Xi, came up through a very, very challenging and difficult system where only the most intelligent and ruthless survive. So, in both men, in Putin and in Xi, you are dealing with highly intelligent, well educated, very thoughtful people who are acutely sensitive to anything that could disrupt or destabilize their societies, their countries. Every morning, Xi wakes up and says, how do I hold 1.4 billion people together? People don't even understand what that means. There are several versions of the United States inside China, as Michael Faber likes to say. So I think Putin looks at this man and has probably decided not to take him seriously at all. Mm-hmm. And he's going to pursue his goals. Now, why haven't we already had a war? Because there's plenty of provocation that would have justified Russian military action against us. For that matter, Chinese military action against us, because neither of those men want a war. The only person that talks about war, the only people that talk about war right now in Asia or the Middle East or Europe are Americans and Israelis. That's it. No one else is interested. So they are going to do whatever they can to avoid conflict, which means if they can mollify him, sort of pacify him in some way, they will. They're not going to surrender, and they're certainly not going to give up their goals. But they've had experience with him before where he said outrageous things, and it went nowhere. Mm-hmm. In other words, right now, I don't think anyone believes anything we say. Period.
Well, that's probably a good thing at this point, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we're saying some crazy things. You worked with Trump. I mean, you worked in the Trump administration. Did you have a lot of interaction with Trump?
Not as much as I would have liked. A couple of interactions, which were very informative. But you must understand that Trump at that point was a different animal from the one we see today, at least as far as I can tell. I think he was chastened in November, December 2020, and in January of 2021. He'd lost this election. He was furious about it. He recognized that he had missed his opportunity to do some really important things. He had wanted to get out of Afghanistan since 2017. But every time he was confronted with a group of generals and politicians in Washington, he said, oh, no, you can't do that. That would be terrible. If you did that, the world would end. And finally, he succumbed to that over and over and over again. So when I was asked to go over and find a way to get us out, I came back and I said, look, you've got to have an executive order from the president. I've already talked to people. We can get out. That's not the issue. Take us about 2 months if we really want to do this. By the way, the winter's the best time to leave because there's a fighting season, and all the people that would normally fight with you or interrupt you and try to halt your orderly withdrawal, they're not around. So if you're going to get out in the winter. So that's great. So an executive order went out. He signed it. We were supposed to be out of there by, I think, mid-January or at the end of January. Ultimately, it all fell apart because Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer and you name it, everybody on the Senate side and people in the House, as well as General Milley and all the great luminaries in uniform. Oh, no, you can't do that. No. So finally, he backs down. He says, well, if I can't take us all out, what can I take? And he said, well, you can take 50% of them out. And he settled for that. Now, why did he do that? Because he doesn't understand anything about international relations or military power. Nothing. And he saw all of these forces arrayed against him. He said, okay, I guess I can't do it. So this is not, let us say, Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson used to say, one man with courage makes a majority. Okay. This is not Andrew Jackson. This is not James Madison. This is not Samuel or John Adams, somebody who's well-educated, understands the world. It's not there. Mm-hmm. So he doesn't have a strategy. He lurches from piece to piece, and he's easily influenced by flattery. Oh, sir, no, you can't let these Russians get away with that. The Lindsey Graham. Well, they're playing you, sir. Come on now, they're playing you. You can't do
Yeah.
that. That's nonsense, But he hears that. He says, "Well, they're not going to play me," and he likes to be the tough guy, and he insists that whatever happens has to be because of him. That he's the winner. He's the center. There's no sense at all that there are greater forces than him working, and that you have to maneuver through and with these forces. So if you can't give him a win, he's not going to do it. And he's got to get a win. So we're going to punish those Russians and bring them to the table because stupid people in Washington, I mean stupid, still take the position that Russia is weak. China is weak. We can bully them just as we bullied everyone else from Vietnam to Iraq. Nobody ever bothers to point out we lost in Vietnam. We were made fools of in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, nobody wants to mention that. So he's got this what I call superpower goggles on. He thinks that we're unchanged in fundamental terms militarily from what we were in 1991. And those forces, they don't even exist anymore. And the composition of the forces is radically different. And the people in charge are radically different. So I think it's a sort of a delusion. And he's surrounded by people, these Israeli influencers that are inside the White House and others who have an incentive to stoke this fire. Oh, sir, you got to do this. You got to be tough and got to stand tall. And, we're all with you and everybody loves you. And you just do this and you'll be a success. That's not very helpful over time.
I wonder if you think he's smart. Yeah, if when you've met with him, did you get the impression? And I ask this because, I think you and I both agree the guy he does have some level of genius, right? The ability for him to build an audience, to get people to go along with what he says, right? He's really, really good at this. He's really good at reading. For the most part, he's been pretty good at reading the room on like, okay, what is it people want to hear? And I'm going to say that thing that people really want to hear. Although he's really faltered a lot lately with Thomas Massie, going after Thomas Massie. He's not reading the room correctly there. And he's not reading the room when it comes to the Epstein files, right? So these are two things he's definitely not reading the room on. But for the most part, and those things are probably interrelated in a lot of ways, with Thomas Massie taking on AIPAC and Trump being the most pro-Israel president ever to have ever existed. But I wonder if you think he's smart, because Xi, as you mentioned, Xi and Putin are clearly very intelligent guys. They're playing chess in a very complicated game of Go, and we're over here playing checkers. In fact, Thomas Massie just posted on X the other day that his late wife who has a degree from MIT, said that the people in Washington, they're not playing 3D chess. They're chewing on the checkers and they're trying to decide which one tastes better, the black or the red. That's how they're behaving. And so, I just wonder if you think he's smart. I used to work with someone who ran one of his companies. He was on The Apprentice and ended up running one of Trump's companies. And he basically said no. He was just like a giant toddler that just, loved to hear what you're kind of talking about, just loved to have his ego stroked but for the most part just was kind of a big giant baby, and everybody else around him was really the ones running things. What impression do you get of him?
Well, based upon what I've seen, I've always felt that his instincts, if he followed them, and he doesn't have the courage to do that because he's not grounded in the areas he needs to be, his instincts are good. He's inclined to do the right thing, but he's easily talked out of it because he doesn't know any better. There's no fundamental knowledge base there. Now, you're right on how he manipulates his base, although I think that's becoming tougher with each passing day. And in all fairness to Thomas Massie, whom I think very highly of, thermometers have degrees, and you know where we stick those. So you can have all the degrees in the world and be an idiot. And we've seen that. I saw lots of that over the last 30 years. The other thing is that he's surrounded by what I call financial capitalists. These are not production capitalists. In other words, Henry Ford, J.D. Rockefeller, Elon Musk have built things. They built things, products, capabilities that drove society in a particular direction. He's surrounded by people from New York City who have figured out how to become wealthy thanks to financial fees, transaction
Hmm.
fees.
Hmm.
They're not building anything. There's no value in any of it. This is the problem with our economy. Everything is being financialized. Nobody's building anything. So he doesn't understand that. He didn't come up through any of that. He inherited most of what he's got. Now,
Hmm.
if you start with 50 million, even if you screw it up badly from time to time, you can still make it into a hell of a lot more just by virtue of the fact that you've got 50 million. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that this is not a highly driven production capitalist. He's
Hmm.
more in line with the financial capitalists that surround him. That's first thing. Second thing is you have to have absolute confidence in yourself in key areas. And that's what I was trying to mention at the beginning. Eisenhower, for instance, the generals and the admirals came in and said, well, we need to be able to send 25 divisions of U.S. Army troops. This is the old World War II structure. 25 divisions would probably be 250, 400,000 men to Europe to face the Soviets. And Eisenhower sort of sat there and said, really? He said, how many ships and aircraft do we have and how many men can we move? Well, they didn't have an answer. They came back the next day and said, sir, well, we have enough ships and aircraft that we could move 15 divisions. He said, that's your new requirement. Now get out. All right. You've got to know what you're doing to make a statement like that. And the Joint Chiefs would have lunch with Eisenhower once a month. They hated it because he asked the hard questions. Don't hand me that crap. I know what you do. I know what you need and what you don't need. So don't do that. But of course, Eisenhower was dealing with two things. He was struggling with a big debt overhang from the Second World War, which, by the way, he almost completely eliminated in two terms. And he was cutting unnecessary spending. What are we doing? We just got the big, beautiful bill, which Elon Musk has rightly pointed out is going to push us over the cliff.
Hmm.
But you've got everybody saying, oh, no, that'll never happen. The repo system just put another 12 billion into the system to rescue the economy last week. Oh, it's not a big deal. That happens all the time. Okay. We the finance doesn't matter until it does.
Hmm.
You know, when we're in the run up to something much worse than 1929. Nobody today can imagine a situation in which 9,000 banks go under. But we've already seen that in Silicon Valley. There are a
Yeah.
lot of other fragile banks. That's where his head should be. He should be preoccupied financially with maintaining stability and prosperity. But what's he doing? He's just building and blowing up more and more and more of a budget that we can't possibly afford. So it's all going to come to an ugly end. I just don't know when.
Yeah, it sounds like it's going to come to World War III because that is usually how we get out of financial crises, right? To this level, it's like, oh, we need war, and we can distract the population with war. There's a lot of restrictions that they can implement during wartime,
Well,
and
you're making a good point, but it doesn't apply to us at the moment, but it could. That's one of the reasons Britain went to war in 1914. They had a
Mhm.
huge problem with unemployment. Their industries had fallen behind. Germany and the United States were taking off like rockets in the steel industry and every other industry that counted optics, chemicals, you name it. The Germans were ahead of everybody, and the British were falling behind. And they said, well, we've got this big unemployment problem. If we today don't declare war, then probably we'll lose office, and another 6 months or a year, they'll declare war anyway. So let's just declare war, and this will be over in 6 months, and everything will be fine. Britain destroyed itself in the First World War. It never really recovered. And World War II just finished them off forever.
Mhm.
Germany recovered, but not Britain. We profited from the war. Germany recovered, bounced back, and was well on its way to greatness again in the mid 1930s. So we're a lot like Britain. And remember that you always have choices when you're dealing with debt. Higher taxation. Well, I guess that's not popular, so we're not going to do that. So if you're not going to tax, what are you going to do? Cut spending? Ooh, we can't cut spending. What do you do? Cut $100 million or $100 billion out of food stamps or something? Come on. What are we going to do? It's a terrible situation. So we're going to do what we've always done. We're going to dig the hole deeper. It's like Bill Clinton said, if you're in a hole, stop digging. Well, we've decided to dig even deeper on the assumption if we keep digging, eventually we'll find gold.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think the potential for a global conflict is real. But the good news is the people on the other side don't want it.
Mm.
That's the
Okay.
good news. And
Yeah.
you have this man, you say he behaves like a toddler or somebody that worked with him. He's got rocket toys and missile toys and so forth, and he's launching them. And he thinks he's the big daddy. Well, I'm not happy with Vladimir Putin. I'm very unhappy. Who cares whether you're happy or not? Do you think Putin gives a damn?
Mhm.
Who do you think you are? Well, that's the key question. Who do you think you are? He thinks we are the great superpower. Look at the tariff war. I mean, this is just insane. And he's threatening the Russians to go to 100%. Russians say, fine, thanks. You think the whole world is going to go along with this? Of course not. That's this thing called BRICS. Donald Trump didn't create it, but he's injecting steroids into it, and it's growing rapidly as a result. Pretty soon it's not going to matter what we say or do. And if we are stupid enough to challenge these people militarily, we'll lose. Now, why would we lose, Kim? Because we are preeminently a maritime and an aerospace power. You're talking about two great continental powers. In fact, you can say three: Russia, China, and Iran. These are continental powers. The only reason Germany was defeated is because everybody ganged up against it. If we'd had to take on the Germans, forget it. We, the British and the French, were doomed.
Mhm.
So if the Soviets hadn't pitched in tens of millions of people and run this giant production machine, we would never have won. But we kind of live in this, Kim, we live in this sort of fantasy world of World War II. We're the arsenal of democracy. Really? What are we producing? What are we building? What could we transform overnight into military power? Yeah, this is craziness. But it appeals. People love to hear it. And if you talk to people, MAGA supporters, oh, that is great. You see what he said? He told those Russians. And I said, it's very stupid. It's not a good idea. Oh, what do you mean? It's the tough guy thing. Americans love it. It's John Wayne.
Hey guys, thank you for watching this clip from the full Kim Iverson Show, which you could check out Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. Eastern at KimIversonShow.com. See you there.